And you're just listening to some of the prosecution's closing arguments in this case that we're following closely out of Florida. Defendant James Colley facing 2 murder charges and a slew of other charges for allegedly killing his estranged wife, Amanda Colley, and shooting execution style his wife's best friend, Lindy Dobbins. What a horrible, horrible situation. I'm joined here by Elura Nanos, a law and crime legal analyst, a frequent guest here. Tell us, what do you make of some of the prosecution's closing arguments as she delves into those harassing text messages that he sent?
Well, I'll tell you that one of the things that really strikes me about this closing argument, where you see the prosecutor using that screen to really go through the statute and really explain to the jurors, on each count, this is what's required for a finding of guilt.
It can get a little dry because you want to sometimes appeal to their emotions, but they need to understand this, too.
That's true. And you know what strikes me about this case is that in many ways, not to take any of the humanity out of this really horrific situation, but in many ways, this is a textbook domestic violence leading to even worse kind of case. And early in my career, I prosecuted domestic violence cases, and I'll tell you that one approaches, as a prosecutor, you approach these cases in 2 kind of very different ways. When it's someone who has a history of domestic violence, proven domestic violence, such that there's an order of protection or something against that person.
And that was the case here.
That was the case here.
He had a protective order, and he was supposed to stay 500 feet away. He was angry from that morning.
That's right.
He was in court. The father, his own father, described him as being very, very angry that day.
And this is exactly why, this is what we worry about with domestic violence, is that, you have someone, and to get a protective order, judges don't just give them out for no reason. A person would have to prove that the person already committed some act of violence or harassment or threats. So this guy had a history of that kind of behavior. He was known to law enforcement. He was known to the family. His wife knew that he had this problem, and yet he still was able to get the proximity to kill her. I mean, and it's so sad because it's so expected in this case. This is what we worry about. This is why we have protective orders. This is why we take domestic violence seriously, even when it hasn't risen to that level. And it's just the saddest possible outcome because the worst still happened.
22 text messages he sent harassing, according to prosecutors, this woman. And before this all happened, Amanda Colley, who is his estranged wife's new boyfriend, recalls him calling her and kind of freaking her out before this all happened. Lamar Dobbins is very important to this because he is the boyfriend, and he was there inside the house when this happened. He took the stand. Take a listen to what he has to say, and especially as he describes the moments leading up to this horrific shooting. So that's some really key testimony from Lamar Dobbins, who is the boyfriend of the estranged wife who is the victim in this case. James Colley on trial for his estranged wife's murder and her best friend, Lindy Dobbins. And you heard why this testimony is so important, because it describes the moments leading up to the shooting and what brought the 4 people that were inside the house together. And that was this burglary. The house was totally ransacked and belongings were everywhere. And according to testimony, it was James Colley, Elura, that did this.
Yeah. I mean, so that starts it out. Even before the crime takes place, we have another ancillary crime that took place beforehand. So it's really setting the stage.
And here you have these guys know that obviously James Colley is very, very upset. And I think there's some indication here that something really, really bad could happen.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think this was a surprise to anyone. Maybe the severity was a surprise, of course. But, I mean, they knew he was upset.
Hold that thought right there. We're going to continue following this trial. We'll take you back inside the courtroom with more first-hand account testimony when we get back. Mike Pickens. Mr. Mike Pickens, all right, some very interesting testimony here, Elura Nanos. He is the friend of the defendant, James Colley here. He's the one that sent James Colley a little pic showing, hey, your wife has a new boyfriend. He's hanging out. And he's the one that the defendant went to after he ransacked his wife's house.
Mike Pickens is kind of an interesting character in this whole story, right?
And his demeanor on the stand, oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh, like we're watching it, and let me tell you what it says to me. I mean,
tell me.
I'm watching him chewing his gum and seeming sort of annoyed that he's even on the stand. It's kind of like he's tolerating it, and I'm thinking, so this is an adult man living across the street.
Thank you for that information that he's
right.
adult.
I mean, not acting like an adult, right?
No.
But he lives across the street from this woman who's going through a divorce, right, with his friend, and he sees a guy at her house, and what does he do? He takes a picture and sends it to his buddy. Obviously, he's doing it because for the reaction.
16-year-olds
exactly, and to say like, oh, look at this, right? So I'm sure that he had, no inclination that that this was going to it was going to instigate murder. However, it seems like the defendant, this guy's friend, had a history of some volatile behavior. So I mean, who does that? And I think that looking at him, it's almost like I'm feeling like Pickens is saying, oh, I sent you this picture. I can't believe that when you got it, you went out and committed murder. Because now he probably feels at least a little bit responsible for it.
Well, and he kind of had some inclinations something bad probably was going to happen because the defendant went to his house with a bunch of crap that he got from his wife's house, the sex toys, a dildo, all this stuff, boxers.
Right, and he said,
okay,
you're going to get in trouble.
We're getting to the conversation now. Hold on. We got to hold that thought because there's more in this case. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. So James Colley, according to that detective you just heard on the stand, repeatedly texting the B word, calling her all sorts of names, saying, why are you doing this? He's upset, okay? He's upset that his estranged wife, Amanda Colley, he's going through a divorce with, is with another man. Let's talk about motive here, because, we were talking a little bit about the nature of these text messages. They're bad, but are they threatening? Did he threaten to kill her in any of them?
And he didn't. I mean, he's clearly angry, right? And I think, earlier you were talking with Dan Shore, who pointed out that it's the specificity that really kind of matters. Like, there is a very specific motive, and all the evidence points to that very specific motive. So the text messages are more damaging because they are so specific, as opposed to because they are so bad. I mean, obviously, it's not nice. Obviously, it shows anger to be calling someone names. It's abusive behavior. However, people send text messages all the time in anger that say this and far worse. So I do think that it's interesting just to point out that these text messages actually, they don't really talk about violence. They don't really send any threats.
But they give you a pretty good window into what is inside this man's mind.
That's right.
And the fact that he's very, very upset at his wife.
Absolutely. So I think on sort of the spectrum of what these text messages could do, I'd give them like a 5 because they are valuable enough that they show motive, they show anger, they tend to prove intent, but not enough that they rise to the level of threats, which would have been even more helpful.
But the prosecution spent a lot of time on these text messages. We're going to delve even deeper, hear more about these when we come back in just a minute. Stay with us. Okay, so we have Detective David Kazi on the stand. He's a digital forensic examiner, Elura, and he's talking about these text messages between James Colley, the defendant in this case, accused of murdering his estranged wife, Amanda Colley, leading up to the murder. They're not nice. Obviously, there's a lot of tension between the two of them. He even references the fact that he got a photo of the new man she was seeing and called him ugly. Yeah, the defendant called him ugly. But what does this tell you? Did these text messages sound like someone that's going to go out and murder someone?
Truthfully, I don't think so. I mean, I think that they support a motive and certainly an inference that he was angry and that he was, maybe an abusive type of person. But I think that on the scale of what text messages could be, they don't immediately say to me that the person is volatile. He's not threatening. He's not saying that he's going to commit a murder.
But taken on their own, of of course, but then you've got eyewitness testimony. You have these guns that he was found with when he escaped to Virginia. There's a lot there in this case.
Absolutely. Taken together, I think that they are meaningful. Taken alone, not so much, but
absolutely. We're going to continue taking our deep dive into this case. I'm going to say goodbye to Elura, and I'll be signing off, and Vincent Hill will be with you next. Stick around.